Nobody ever talked about Kang Jae-Min without lowering their voice. His name traveled ahead of him like a warning, heavy, deliberate, impossible to ignore. In a city that glittered with neon lights and hidden dangers, he was the quiet storm beneath it all. Men respected him. Enemies avoided him. Women, however, rarely stayed. They said it was his size. At 6'4", broad-shouldered and solidly built, Jae-Min carried himself with a stillness that unsettled people. He didn't smile unnecessarily. He didn't waste words. When he entered a room, conversations shifted. When he looked at someone, they felt examined, measured. And for many women, that intensity felt like standing too close to fire. So they ran. Amara Johnson had heard the whispers long before she saw him. The club pulsed with music and artificial laughter, but the moment he stepped inside, the energy dipped. Dancers subtly redirected themselves. Some pretended not to notice him at all. His usual VIP table remained momentarily empty. Amara stood near the bar watching. She had learned early in life that fear often hid misunderstanding. Growing up in South Chicago after her mother's passing, she'd worked too hard and sacrificed too much to be intimidated by rumors. Stripping wasn't her dream, it was survival. Every dollar went toward clearing hospital debts and building a future she refused to give up on. And something about the way Jae-Min sat alone, straight-backed, hands folded calmly on the table, didn't match the monster people described. He wasn't leering. He wasn't beckoning anyone over. He looked distant. Before she could overthink it, Amara walked toward him. Min-jun, his right-hand man, glanced at her cautiously, but Jae-Min lifted a hand slightly, signaling it was fine. When Amara reached the table, she met his eyes. They weren't cold. They were tired. He spoke quietly, his voice deep but controlled. "Are you comfortable being here?" The question startled her. Not because of how he said it, but because no one had ever asked her that before. "Not here." "Yes," she replied evenly. He nodded once, accepting her answer without probing further. There was no grabbing. No entitlement. No arrogance. Just silence. For the rest of the evening, they spoke in brief exchanges. He asked about her name. She asked if he was always this quiet. He didn't laugh, but something softened in his gaze. When she left the table that night, whispers followed her. But Amara didn't care. For the first time since she'd started working there, she felt seen, not as a body, not as entertainment, but as a person. And across the dim room, Kang Jae-Min watched her walk away, something unfamiliar settling in his guarded chest. If this chapter intrigued you, stay with this story. Their journey is only beginning, and sometimes the strongest love starts where fear once lived. Kang Jae-Min returned the following week, and then the week after that. He did not request Amara by name, but the manager began assigning her to his table anyway. The other dancers were relieved. No one competed for the spot. They still whispered about him, about his height, his strength, the silent way he commanded a room without trying. To them he was intimidating. To Amara he was becoming something else entirely. Predictable. He always arrived at the same hour, sat in the same seat, ordered the same drink. And every time she approached, he greeted her with a small nod of acknowledgement, never reaching for her, never treating her like something he had purchased. Their conversations grew longer. He asked about her childhood. She told him about her mother's warmth and the hospital bills that followed her passing. He listened without interrupting, his expression steady but attentive. When she admitted she wanted to open a dance academy one day, somewhere girls could learn confidence without exploitation, he didn't laugh. "You would be good at that," he said simply. No grand speech. No empty flattery. Just certainty. One evening, the fragile peace shattered. A drunken customer, emboldened by too much alcohol and too little restraint, grabbed Amara's wrist as she passed his table. His fingers tightened painfully, his laughter loud and careless. The music continued, but tension sliced through the air. Before security could move, Jae-Min was already standing. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He stepped forward with deliberate calm and looked down at the man holding her. "Let her go." His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. The drunk man hesitated, perhaps recognizing the name, perhaps sensing the danger in Jae-Min's stillness. Slowly he released her. Jae-Min did not strike him. He didn't create a scene. He simply remained there until the man stumbled away under security's watchful eyes. Then he turned back to Amara. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though her pulse raced. For a moment she saw something raw in his expression, not anger but concern. Protective instinct wrapped in restraint. Without thinking, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It was brief, instinctive. He froze. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. After a second, his large arms lifted carefully as though afraid to break her, and rested around her shoulders. It wasn't possessive. It wasn't forceful. It was gentle. When she pulled back, she noticed something no one else in the club had ever seen. Kang Jae-Min looked relieved, as if protecting her had given him permission to exist as more than just a weapon. And for the first time the rumors about his size felt meaningless. Because what Amara felt in that embrace wasn't fear. It was safety. Rumors travel faster than loyalty in a city ruled by power. Within days, the Kang syndicate knew that Jae-Min had been visiting the same club repeatedly, and that a particular woman had been seen at his side. In their world, attachment was not romance. It was vulnerability. And vulnerability was dangerous. Amara felt the shift before anyone said it aloud. The club manager began watching her closely. Conversations stopped when she entered the dressing room. Even Tasha, her fiercest defender, looked uneasy one night as they counted tips together. "You know who he is, right?" Tasha asked quietly. "I know enough," Amara replied. "That's not an answer." Amara sighed. "He's not what people think." Tasha softened but didn't look convinced. "Men with that kind of power don't date girls like us, Amara. They keep secrets. They make enemies. And sometimes, they disappear." The warning lingered long after the music started. Across town, Jae-Min stood in his father's private office, the air thick with incense and authority. Chairman Kang Dae-hyun did not raise his voice when he spoke. He didn't need to. "A woman from a club," the chairman said evenly. "You allow her near you repeatedly." "She is not a threat," Jae-Min replied. "All attachments are threats." Jae-Min remained silent. His father studied him carefully. "You were not raised to want things you cannot protect." The implication was clear. But something inside Jae-Min resisted the cold logic he had lived by his entire life. That night, instead of entering the club, he waited outside. When Amara finished her shift, she found him leaning against a sleek black car, hands in his coat pockets. "You're early," she teased gently. "I wanted to walk you to your car," he answered. She blinked. "You don't have to." "I know." They walked side by side under the city lights, the distance between them comfortable. He did not touch her. Did not claim space that wasn't offered. "Are you in trouble because of me?" she asked suddenly. He paused. "There are concerns. And I don't regret it." The honesty surprised even him. She stopped walking and faced him. "You don't have to protect me from whispers." "I'm not protecting you from whispers," he said quietly. "I'm protecting you from what whispers become." For a moment, the world felt smaller, just the two of them standing beneath streetlights in uncertainty. Without hesitation, she stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him again. This time he did not freeze. His embrace came naturally, firm but careful, like he had finally decided he was allowed to hold something precious. Across the street, unseen eyes watched. And in two very different worlds, lines had officially been crossed. Power always demanded something in return. For Kang Jae-Min it demanded silence. Endurance. The ability to stand unshaken while chaos unfolded around him. He had learned early that weakness was punished, and vulnerability was a language he was never taught to speak. But even the strongest men carried bruises no one saw. Amara noticed the difference the moment he stepped into the club that night. He was later than usual. His suit jacket hung slightly uneven on his broad frame, and there was a faint cut along his cheekbone, small but impossible to ignore. His movements were steady, yet something in his posture felt heavier. When she approached his table, he didn't look up immediately. "You're hurt," she said softly. "It's nothing," he replied as he always did. But she didn't return to the stage. Instead, she slid into the seat beside him. The music pulsed around them, laughter rising and falling like waves, but their corner felt isolated, protected by shadows and silence. "You don't have to pretend with me," she told him gently. He kept his eyes forward. "Pretend? That you're made of stone?" For a long moment he said nothing. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger but in restraint. The kind that came from years of holding everything inside. "I was trained to endure," he said finally. "Not to complain." She studied him carefully. Beneath the controlled exterior was exhaustion. Not physical but emotional. The kind that settled into the bones of someone who carried too much alone. Without asking permission, Amara reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. The contact was simple. Warm. "You don't always have to endure," she whispered. Something shifted in his breathing. He wasn't used to this, someone sitting beside him without fear, without expectation. Someone who saw past the intimidation and didn't flinch. When the night ended, he didn't stand immediately. He remained seated, staring at nothing in particular. So she made the first move. Amara stood, stepped in front of him, and slowly wrapped her arms around his shoulders. Not quickly. Not playfully. But fully. At first, his body tensed out of habit. Then gradually, his arms rose and encircled her waist. Carefully. As if holding something fragile for the first time. He leaned down slightly, his forehead resting near her shoulder. "No one has ever held me," he murmured quietly, without fear. Her heart tightened. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. And she meant it. In that embrace there was no Mafia title. No reputation. No expectations. Just two people standing in the middle of noise, choosing softness in a world that had taught them to survive without it. For Jae-Min it was the first time strength didn't mean standing alone. And for Amara, it was the moment she realized she wasn't just staying out of curiosity. She was staying because she cared. Love, even in its quietest form, rarely goes unnoticed in dangerous circles. It began with a black car that lingered too long outside the club. Then unfamiliar faces inside. Men who didn't drink, didn't smile, didn't tip. They only watched. Amara felt it before Jae-Min confirmed it. "You're being observed," he told her one evening, his voice calm but firm. She crossed her arms. "By who?" "Victor Alvarez." The name carried weight. Rival syndicate leader. Ruthless. Calculating. A man who believed pressure revealed weakness. "And I'm the pressure," she said quietly. Jae-Min didn't deny it. The realization didn't frighten her as much as it should have. Maybe because fear had been part of her life long before Mafia politics entered it. Bills. Grief. Survival. This was just another storm. "I can relocate you," Jae-Min continued. "Somewhere secure." She shook her head immediately. "You mean hidden?" "Safe," he corrected. "Safe and silent." His jaw tightened slightly. "I won't love you from a cage," she said gently but firmly. "If I stay in your life, I stay in it fully." The words struck him harder than any threat. Days later, Jae-Min made a decision that surprised even his closest men. He brought Amara to a formal syndicate gathering, public, deliberate, undeniable. The room stilled when they entered together. Suits. Silk dresses. Cold stares. Chairman Kang observed from across the hall, unreadable. Amara wore no fear on her face. She walked beside Jae-Min with steady grace, her chin lifted not in arrogance but dignity. She wasn't there to challenge anyone. She was there to stand. Whispers rippled through the room. "That's her. The stripper. She won't last." Amara heard every word. Jae-Min did too. For a brief moment, tension climbed like a tightening wire. A few men stepped forward with polite but pointed questions. About her background, her intentions. She answered calmly. "I don't want power," she said clearly. "I want him safe." Silence followed. No performance. No manipulation. Just truth. When the atmosphere threatened to shift into something sharper, Amara did something simple. She reached for Jae-Min's hand. The gesture was small but public. His large fingers closed around hers without hesitation. In that single moment, alliances were tested. Lines were drawn. And Victor Alvarez, somewhere in the city, received confirmation of exactly where to strike. But inside that room, beneath crystal lights and guarded expressions, one truth became undeniable. Amara Johnson was not a weakness. She was choosing him. And Kang Jae-Min was no longer standing alone. Chairman Kang Dae-hyun did not summon people twice. When the message arrived requesting Amara's presence at the Kang estate, it was not framed as an invitation. It was an evaluation. The estate itself stood on a quiet hill overlooking the city, traditional architecture blended with modern steel, a symbol of legacy and control. Amara felt the weight of it the moment she stepped through the gates. Jae-Min walked beside her, not ahead. Inside, the chairman waited in a private sitting room lined with calligraphy and ancestral portraits. His presence was composed, deliberate, carved from decades of leadership. Amara bowed respectfully, careful and sincere. "Chairman Kang," she greeted. He studied her without warmth, but without immediate hostility either. "You understand the position my son holds," he began. "Yes." "You understand the enemies that come with it." "Yes." "And still you remain." "I do." The chairman's eyes sharpened slightly. "Why?" It was not a trap. It was a test. Amara did not rush her answer. "I've spent my life around men who pretend to be powerful," she said evenly. "Your son doesn't pretend. He carries responsibility. Quietly. that kind of strength shouldn't be alone. The room fell still. Chairman Kang glanced briefly at Jae-Min, then back at her. You do not fear him. No, she replied softly. I fear what the world has made him carry without comfort. The honesty unsettled the room more than defiance would have. After a long pause, the chairman spoke again. You believe you can stand beside him? I already am. There was no challenge in her tone. Only certainty. The meeting ended without approval, but without rejection. Outside, Jae-Min exhaled slowly, tension easing from his shoulders. You were not intimidated, he observed. I've faced worse than a quiet room, she teased gently. For the first time since she had known him, Jae-Min allowed himself a faint smile, small but real. In the privacy of the garden courtyard, beneath trimmed pines and soft evening light, he turned toward her. You did not have to do that, he said. Yes, I did. Before he could respond, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. This hug was not born from fear or crisis. It was reassurance. His arms came around her naturally now, no hesitation, no stiffness. He held her firmly but carefully, as though anchoring himself. For the first time in years, Jae-Min felt something shift within his carefully guarded world. Tradition had not broken, but it had bent. And in that quiet courtyard, beneath watchful ancestors and a cautious future, a bridge between two worlds began to take shape. Violence rarely announces itself politely. The attack came just before midnight, swift, coordinated, and unmistakably strategic. One of the Kang Syndicate's warehouses was ambushed, several men injured, messages left behind like signatures carved into steel. It wasn't random. It was Victor Alvarez. Jae-Min handled the aftermath with clinical precision. Orders were given. Security was reinforced. Retaliation was considered, but measured. Outwardly, he remained the same unshakable force his men trusted. Inwardly, one thought eclipsed all others. Amara. By morning, surveillance around the club had doubled. Unmarked cars rotated shifts. Minjun personally reviewed security routes. Still, it wasn't enough. Jae-Min made a decision he despised. He went to her apartment. Amara opened the door with a tired smile that faded the moment she saw his expression. What happened? She asked. Nothing that concerns you anymore, he replied. Her eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means, he said carefully, this ends now. The words hung between them like frost. You don't mean that, she said quietly. I do. You're lying. Silence. He stepped back slightly as if creating distance would make the decision cleaner. Victor is escalating. You are an obvious target. I won't allow that. So you push me away? Her voice trembled, not with weakness but disbelief. You think that protects me? It removes you from the equation. I'm not an equation, she snapped. Then softer, I'm a person. One who chose you. His jaw tightened. Choice does not matter when bullets are involved. And love doesn't? She challenged. The word lingered. He hadn't said it yet. Neither had she. But it existed between them, undeniable. Instead of arguing further, Amara stepped forward. Jae-Min expected anger. He expected tears. He did not expect her arms wrapping tightly around him. You don't get to decide for both of us, she whispered against his chest. I'm not leaving because it's dangerous. I'm staying because it matters. At first he stood rigid, struggling between instinct and emotion. Then the restraint cracked. His arms closed around her, stronger than before, almost desperate. He lowered his head, holding her as if anchoring himself to something real. I have lost men, he said quietly. I cannot lose you. You won't, she replied. Not because you pushed me away, but because we stand together. For the first time in his life, Jae-Min understood something his father had never taught him. Strength wasn't always about letting go. Sometimes, it was about holding on, even when fear demanded otherwise. And in that embrace, he chose not to walk away. Victor Alvarez was not a man who repeated himself. When intimidation failed, he escalated. Tasha disappeared on a Tuesday evening. She had texted Amara only an hour earlier about dinner plans. Then her phone went dark. No calls. No social media activity. No answer at her apartment. By midnight, Amara knew. This wasn't coincidence. She didn't panic. She drove straight to Jae-Min. Minjun opened the door to the private office, tension already thick in the air. Jae-Min looked up immediately, reading her expression before she spoke. It's Tasha, she said steadily. She's gone. The room shifted. Within minutes, surveillance teams were mobilized. Locations cross-checked. Informants contacted. Jaemin's face remained composed, but something darker simmered beneath the calm. "This is my fault," he said quietly. "No," Amara replied firmly. "This is Victor's choice." A message arrived before dawn, coordinates to an abandoned shipping yard. A demand for a meeting. No police. No delay. Minjun insisted Amara stay behind. Jaemin expected the same resistance from her. He was wrong. "I'm coming," she said. "It's dangerous." "So is loving you," she answered without hesitation. "And I'm still here." He studied her carefully, not seeing recklessness but resolve. When they arrived, the warehouse stood silent against the gray morning sky. Victor's men waited, confident in their leverage. But they had underestimated one thing. Amara did not hide behind Jaemin. She stood beside him. Negotiations were tense but controlled. Victor attempted to provoke, to taunt, to imply that attachment had weakened the feared underboss. Jaemin didn't rise to it. His voice remained level, calculated, unmoved. Because Amara's presence wasn't a weakness. It was clarity. The exchange ended swiftly, resources traded, boundaries reasserted. Tasha was released, shaken but unharmed. The moment she crossed the distance toward them, Amara ran forward, embracing her tightly. Relief flooded through her in waves she hadn't allowed herself to feel. When she turned back, Jaemin stood watching. Not victorious, not triumphant, just relieved. She crossed the space between them and stepped into his arms without hesitation. This hug was different. It wasn't born from comfort. It wasn't born from fear. It was born from survival. His arms closed around her firmly, protective yet steady. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. In that silent embrace, a truth solidified. They had been tested. And neither of them had walked away. Victor had tried to divide them. Instead, he had forced them to choose. And they chose each other. Power, once challenged, demanded resolution. Victor Alvarez's influence weakened rapidly after the failed attempt to fracture the Kang syndicate. Allies withdrew. Deals collapsed. His name, once spoken with calculated fear, became a cautionary tale about overreaching. Jaemin did not celebrate. He simply restored balance. Under his direction, parts of the syndicate quietly shifted toward legitimate enterprises, security firms, import businesses, property investments. It was not redemption, but it was change. And through every long meeting and tense negotiation, Amara remained present, not inside the operations but within his life. One evening, he told her to dress comfortably. "No formal event?" she asked with a small smile. "No audience," he replied. They drove across the city to a quiet neighborhood she had not visited in months. The building they stopped in front of was modest but familiar. Amara's breath caught. The old dance studio she once rented by the hour, before bills forced her to give it up, stood freshly renovated. The windows gleamed. The faded sign had been replaced. She turned slowly toward him. "What is this?" "Yours," he answered simply. Inside, polished wooden floors reflected soft overhead lighting. Mirrors stretched along the walls. A small office space sat near the entrance, complete with paperwork already filed under her name. "You said you wanted a place where girls could learn confidence without fear," he continued. "This building is paid for. Staff interviews begin next week. If you still want it." Tears filled her eyes, not from extravagance but from being heard. "You remembered," she whispered. "I remember everything you say." She stepped closer, emotion thick in her chest. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." He did not kneel. He did not produce a ring in that moment. Instead, he opened his arms. It was deliberate, vulnerable in its own way. "I don't know how to give speeches," he admitted. "But I know I don't want a future that doesn't include you." Her laughter broke through tears. "That's your proposal?" "It's honest." She closed the remaining distance and stepped into his embrace. "Yes," she whispered against his chest. "It's enough." His arms tightened around her, not possessive, not overwhelming, but certain. In the quiet of the empty studio, surrounded by possibility and polished floors waiting for new beginnings, they stood together. Not because the world had softened, but because they had chosen to build something steady within it. And sometimes forever doesn't begin with kneeling. Sometimes it begins with standing side by side. Years passed, and the city continued to pulse with the same neon lights and hidden dangers. But the world had changed for Amara and Jae-Min. Amara's dance academy thrived. Every morning she unlocked the polished doors of the studio, greeting girls who arrived with shy smiles and big dreams. She taught more than dance. Confidence. Courage. The lesson that strength could be gentle and love could be steady. And every evening she returned to the home she shared with Jae-Min, a space that balanced warmth and authority, softness and safety. Jae-Min too had changed, not because he had softened entirely but because he had learned to let someone in without fear. The syndicate remained a part of his life, but much of the violence had been replaced by legitimate business ventures. He walked among the streets with the same presence he always had, but now, he carried something else, a calm certainty that home awaited him. One quiet afternoon, a small anniversary celebration took place in the academy's courtyard. Children danced around, laughter spilling into the warm sunlight. Amara leaned against Jae-Min, the same way she had the first time she had wrapped her arms around him years ago. His hand rested naturally on her shoulder, firm, protective, familiar. A visiting parent asked, curious, "Weren't you scared when you first met him?" Amara smiled, watching the children spin and jump. "No," she said softly. "I was scared of leaving." Jae-Min chuckled quietly, low and steady. "And yet you stayed." "I stayed because I knew something the others didn't," she replied. "You aren't just strength. You're someone worth standing beside." He tightened his arm around her, his lips brushing the top of her head. "And you're someone worth protecting, not because I have to but because I want to." In the courtyard, the world felt impossibly light. No whispers, no threats, no rumors. Only laughter, sunlight, and the gentle brush of hands against hands. The love that had started in a crowded club, survived Mafia threats, and endured through fear and misunderstanding, now existed quietly but firmly. They had built something beyond reputation and power. Beyond rumors and danger. Beyond fear. It was trust. Respect. Trust. They held each other as children ran past, imagining dreams, testing courage and daring to hope. In that embrace, Amara and Jae-Min realized that forever didn't need fireworks or grand proclamations. It existed in the quiet, in the steady heartbeat of two people who chose each other every day. And in that choice they were unstoppable.